The first time my brother said it out loud, the church went quiet in a way I didn't know silence could sound. Not the respectful hush of mourning, but the sharp, collective intake of breath when a truth lands like a blade. He stood at the front pew, black suit, red eyes that never quite met mine, and said, "Dad would have wanted us to be practical." Then he looked at our mother, then at me, and finally, like he was announcing the weather, he said, "I'm selling the house." That was the moment everything broke open. I remember the smell first. Polished wood and old flowers, lilies already turning sour. I remember the way my hands were folded too tightly in my lap, nails digging into my skin as if pain could anchor me to the bench. And I remember thinking, not here, not today. But betrayal never asks permission. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. My father's casket was still open. People hadn't even finished telling us how peaceful he looked. My brother cleared his throat the way he always did before asking for money, the same tone he'd used since we were teenagers, the same confidence born from knowing someone else would always clean up his mess. "Dad had debts," he said, "and I do too." That was when the number came out. $340,000. Gambling, online poker, sports bets, things that felt unreal compared to the very real house my father had built with his own hands. Our family home. The house where I learned to ride a bike in the driveway while my brother sat inside playing video games. The house where I paid rent to live in my childhood bedroom while he came and went without ever contributing a dollar. The house my father promised, quietly, carefully, would always be my safe place. My mother nodded beside him. She didn't look at me when she said it. "Your dad would understand," she murmured. Then, without hesitation, "Your sister can find another place." Just like that. No discussion, no warning, no grief big enough to pause the decision. I felt something inside me go very still, not angry, not even shocked, just confirmed. I was 32 years old, standing at my father's funeral, being told I was disposable. And the worst part? This wasn't new. I'd been the forgotten daughter my whole life. My brother got second chances, third chances, infinite chances. I got lectures about responsibility. He dropped out of college twice. Dad paid. I worked 2 jobs through school. Dad said I was strong enough to handle it. He wrecked a car. Dad bought another. I took the bus and saved for years. Everyone said I was independent. No one noticed I was alone. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who grew up this way. Always expected to cope, to adapt, to sacrifice, while someone else was endlessly protected. And standing there in that church, I finally understood something I'd never let myself admit before. They expected me to disappear quietly. After the service, people hugged us, whispered condolences, told my brother how sorry they were for him. No one asked me where I would go. My brother pulled me aside near the vestibule where the stained glass windows painted his face in reds and blues that didn't suit him. "You'll be fine," he said. "You'll land on your feet." That sentence, "you'll be fine," was the final insult, because what he meant was, you don't matter enough to protect. I went home that night to the house that apparently wasn't mine anymore, sat on my bed, listened to the walls creak like they were remembering things I wasn't allowed to keep. That's when the first letter arrived. It was addressed to me, in my father's handwriting, dated 15 years earlier. My hand shook as I opened it, grief mixing with confusion. Dad hadn't written me letters. He'd never been a man of emotional speeches or dramatic gestures. Inside was a single sentence. "If you are reading this, it means they didn't tell you. Go to the safety deposit box." My heart started to pound, because suddenly the story I thought I knew, the one where my father favored my brother, where I was invisible, began to crack. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of man planned something in secret for 15 years, wondering why he never said anything, wondering what exactly he was trying to protect me from. And most of all, I wondered this: what happens when the people who underestimated you finally realize they made a mistake? Because whatever my father had left behind, it was waiting, and my brother had no idea what was coming.
The bank opened at 9. I was there at 8:47, sitting in my car with the engine off, watching my breath fog the windshield. The letter lay on the passenger seat, unfolded so many times the creases were soft. I kept rereading that single sentence like it might change if I stared long enough. Go to the safety deposit box. My father hated banks. He trusted land, wood, and ink, things you could touch. The idea that he'd quietly maintained a safety deposit box for 15 years didn't fit the version of him my family believed in. Or maybe it didn't fit the version they wanted to believe in. When the doors finally unlocked, I was the first one inside. The clerk was polite, efficient, unaware she was about to hand me the hinge of my entire past. I gave her my ID, my father's death certificate, my hand still trembling just enough to notice. She disappeared into the back and returned with a small brass key attached to a tag. Box 317. The vault smelled cold and metallic. Rows of identical boxes stared back at me like secrets that didn't want to be found. When she slid the drawer onto the table and left me alone, the quiet felt heavier than the church had. I unlocked it. Inside was not money, not jewelry, not deeds, at least not at first glance. It was paper, thick folders, carefully labeled. My name was written on the top of every single one. I felt my chest tighten as if the air had been pulled from the room. This wasn't an afterthought. This wasn't a rushed decision made on a hospital bed. This was deliberate. The first folder contained a copy of the house deed, not the one my brother thought existed. This one had an amendment attached, filed, notarized, and buried so deep in legal language it took me a full minute to understand what I was reading. 15 years ago, my father had transferred the house into a family trust, a trust with conditions, and one beneficiary, me. I had to sit down. The bench was cold under my legs as the reality settled in. The house couldn't be sold, not by my brother, not by my mother, not without my written consent, and even then, only after certain criteria were met. Criteria my brother would never meet. There were more folders, bank statements showing a separate account I'd never known existed, not massive wealth, but enough to pay property taxes, maintenance, legal fees, enough to keep the house standing. And then there were the letters, not just one, dozens, each dated, each sealed, each written in my father's steady, unmistakable handwriting. I opened the first. "You were never invisible to me," it began. That was when I started to cry. Not the quiet, polite tears I'd shed at the funeral. This was ugly, deep, years of swallowed disappointment pouring out in a bank vault that had never heard a confession before. He wrote about watching me take responsibility too young, about how proud he was of my work ethic, my independence, my refusal to ask for help even when I needed it. "I didn't protect you the way I should have when you were young," one letter said, "so I decided to protect your future instead." The truth hit harder than the betrayal ever had. My father knew exactly how unequal things were. He just chose a different battlefield. By the time I left the bank, my grief had shifted. It was still there, but now it had edges, shape, purpose. My phone buzzed before I even reached the car. My brother. I didn't answer. Then my mother. Then again and again.
By the time I got home, there were 7 missed calls and a text message that made my stomach drop. Why is the lawyer asking questions about the house? So that was it. They'd already started moving, already assuming the house was theirs to liquidate like everything else in our family that had ever been converted into my brother's rescue fund. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the living room, looking at it with new eyes. The couch where I'd slept after double shifts, the window my father used to stand by every evening watching the street like he was keeping guard. This wasn't just a house. It was a line he'd drawn quietly, patiently, waiting for someone to cross. The door slammed behind me. My brother stood there, jaw tight, phone in hand. "What did you do?" he demanded. I set my keys down slowly, deliberately. "I went to the bank," I said. His face changed, not confusion, fear, the kind that only shows up when someone realizes the rules they've been playing by don't apply anymore. "You had no right. This is family business," he snapped. I laughed, once, short and humorless. "Funny," I said. "That's what you said at the funeral." My mother appeared behind him, eyes sharp, calculating. She looked past me at the walls, the floors, the things she thought she could sell. "You're being selfish. Your brother is in trouble." I didn't raise my voice. "I've been paying rent here for 10 years while he gambled." Silence stretched between us. Then my brother said something that sealed everything. "You owe us. Dad would have wanted you to help." I reached into my bag, pulled out one of the letters, held it up. "No," I said quietly. "He wanted to help me." My brother lunged forward, snatching for the paper, but I stepped back. "You don't get to rewrite him now. You had your whole life." His hands curled into fists, and that was the moment I realized something terrifying and clarifying all at once. They weren't grieving my father. They were grieving their control, because they could feel it slipping, and they were about to fight dirty to get it back. My brother didn't sleep in the house that night. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture frame rattled off the wall. The sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot, and for a split second, my body reacted the way it always had, bracing, apologizing internally, preparing to smooth things over. Then I stopped. I didn't chase him. I didn't explain myself. I didn't try to make it okay. That alone felt like rebellion. My mother stayed. She moved around the kitchen the next morning like nothing had happened, making coffee, wiping counters that were already clean. That was her specialty, normalizing chaos, turning emotional wreckage into routine so no one ever questioned who caused it. She finally spoke without turning around. "You know," she said, "families don't survive when people start keeping secrets." I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Then you should be furious at Dad. He kept them for 15 years. Her hand froze. That's when she turned to face me, eyes sharp with something that wasn't grief. It was strategy. "You're twisting this," she said. "Your father didn't mean for things to go this far." I held her gaze. "He meant exactly this. That's why he put it in writing." She sighed, like I was a difficult child refusing vegetables. "You always were sensitive," she said softly. "Your brother needs help. This house could fix everything." There it was. Not save him, not protect him, fix everything. As if consequences were a mechanical error, not the result of decades of choices. "I'm not selling the house," I said. Her face hardened. "Then you're choosing money over family." That sentence had been waiting my entire life. It was the blade they used every time I drew a boundary, every time I said no, every time I asked for fairness instead of scraps. I took a breath. "I'm choosing myself for the first time." She laughed, sharp and dismissively. "Don't be dramatic. You wouldn't even have this house if it weren't for us." I felt the truth settle in my bones, heavy and calm. I have this house because Dad wanted me to, and you don't get to guilt me out of that. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe she didn't. By noon, the calls started again. Aunts, cousins, people who hadn't checked on me in years suddenly found my number. Every conversation followed the same script, concern wrapped around accusation. Your brother is struggling. Your mother is beside herself. Is this really how your father would have wanted it? I stopped answering after the 5th call. Then the lawyer called. He was careful with his words, professional to the core, but I could hear the tension underneath. Your brother has retained counsel, he said. They're challenging the trust. My stomach clenched. On what grounds? I asked. He paused. Undue influence, he said. They're implying you manipulated your father. I laughed out loud. Did they even know about the trust? I asked. No, which makes the argument thin. Thin, but dangerous. That night, I pulled every letter back out, spread them across my bed like a paper shield. Dates, details, evidence of a mind that had been clear, methodical, and unpressured. This wasn't a dying man's impulse. This was a father watching patterns repeat and deciding to end them. The next morning, my brother showed up again. This time, he brought someone with him. A man in a suit too expensive for our living room, smile polished, eyes cold. My attorney, he said, like it was a threat. They sat across from me at the dining table where my father used to read the newspaper every morning. The lawyer spoke first. We believe there's been a misunderstanding, he said smoothly. Families often make arrangements informally. Legal documents can be misinterpreted. I slid a copy of the trust across the table. Then interpret this, I said. His eyes scanned the page. His smile faded. My brother leaned forward. You don't need all this, he said. You already have your life, your job. You don't need the house. There it was again. Need versus deserve. I met his eyes. You didn't need it either. You wanted it. His jaw tightened. You're punishing me, he snapped. No, I said. I'm refusing to rescue you. The lawyer cleared his throat. If this goes to court, it will be expensive, stressful, public. Good, I replied, because I have nothing to hide. My brother stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. You think you won? He said. You think Dad chose you? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, I think he saw us clearly. That's when my brother lost control. You were never his favorite. You were just the backup. The room went quiet. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. I felt free. Because if that was the worst thing he could say, if that was the story he needed to tell himself, then I finally understood the truth. He needed me small to survive, and I was done being small. They left shortly after. Threats made, deadlines mentioned, doors slammed. I stood alone in the house, listening to the echoes fade. That night I found the final letter. It was sealed separately, marked, "Read only if they try to take it from you." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were instructions, names, documents, safeguards I hadn't even considered, and one final sentence that made my knees buckle. If they challenge this, they will reveal everything they've hidden. Let them. I realized then that my father hadn't just protected me, he'd set a trap, and my brother was already walking straight into it. The court filing arrived 3 days later. Not by mail, by email, CC'd to everyone. My brother wanted an audience. The subject line alone felt aggressive. Petition to invalidate trust due to undue influence and mental incapacity. I read it once, then again slower. Each accusation was sharper than the last.
that my father had been confused, that he'd been isolated, that I had taken advantage of his declining health. It was a character assassination wrapped in legal language, and it wasn't just aimed at me. It rewrote my father into a weak man who didn't know his own mind. That was the moment my grief turned into something colder. Resolve. I forwarded the email to my lawyer with a single sentence. "They've activated the clause." He called me within minutes. "Have you read the contingency appendix?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Every word." There was a pause on the line. "Then you know what this means," he said. "I do," I replied, "and they don't." The appendix was the trap. Buried deep in the trust documents was a provision my father had anticipated years in advance. If any beneficiary or would-be beneficiary challenged the trust, a full forensic accounting would be triggered. Not just of the trust, of everything. Every loan my father had quietly paid off for my brother, every debt he'd absorbed, every transfer disguised as a gift, every signature my brother had ever forged with permission, and most devastating of all, every dollar my mother had redirected without my father's knowledge. They thought they were dragging me into court. They had no idea they were dragging themselves into daylight. The first hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In those 14 days, my family transformed. My mother stopped pretending. She left voicemails that swung wildly between sobbing and rage. One minute she was my baby, the next I was ungrateful, vindictive, just like my aunt, the one no one spoke to anymore because she'd torn the family apart. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so familiar. My brother went public. He posted on Facebook long emotional paragraphs about grief and betrayal, about how money destroys families, about how he was fighting for what Dad would have wanted. People commented heart emojis, told him he was brave. No one asked why his debts were exactly $340,000. No one asked where the money had gone. I stayed silent. That silence drove them insane. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I slept better than I had in years because for the first time, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was standing behind glass watching them hit it over and over again. A week before the hearing, the first subpoena landed. Then another, then another. Bank records, casino statements, online betting platforms, credit cards opened in my father's name without his knowledge. My brother called me at midnight. His voice was different, smaller. He said, "They're asking about things from years ago. This is unnecessary." I said, "You filed the challenge." He snapped, "I didn't know it would go this far. You could stop this." I closed my eyes. "No," I said, "I couldn't." There was breathing on the line, fast, panicked. "You always hated me," he said suddenly. "This is revenge." I felt the truth settle again, heavy and steady. "This is consequence," I replied. "You just mistook my silence for consent." He hung up on me. The night before the hearing, my lawyer came over with 2 thick binders. He set them on the table where my brother had once demanded the house. "You should be prepared," he said. "Tomorrow won't be subtle." "What about my mother?" I asked. He hesitated. "She's exposed, more than she realizes." I nodded. I thought about all the times she told me to be patient, to be understanding, to let things go for the sake of peace. Peace, I'd learned, was just another word for compliance.
The courtroom was colder than I expected. My brother sat at the opposite table, jaw clenched, suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. My mother sat behind him, clutching her purse like a shield. She didn't look at me. The judge entered. Formalities followed, and then, slowly, methodically, the truth began to surface. My lawyer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He presented documents, dates, numbers. He showed that my father was of sound mind, not just at the time of the trust, but consistently, that he'd consulted multiple attorneys, that he'd revised the documents as laws changed. Then came the financial trail. The judge's expression changed. My brother shifted in his seat. When he was asked directly about the gambling debts, he tried to minimize. Recreational, he said, under control. The bank statement said otherwise. When he was asked about the credit cards, he glanced at my mother. She flinched. And then it was her turn. She took the stand with the confidence of someone who'd always believed she would be protected by the word mother. She wasn't. The forensic accountant spoke next, calm, precise. He explained how funds were redirected, how accounts were drained slowly to avoid detection, how my father had noticed and quietly documented everything. The room went silent when the accountant said, "Based on our findings, the trust was not an act of undue influence. It was an act of risk mitigation." I didn't look at my family. I didn't need to. I could feel it the moment the narrative collapsed. The judge recessed the court for the day. As everyone stood, my mother finally turned to me. Her eyes weren't angry anymore. They were afraid. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. I met her gaze. "It already did," I said. As I walked out of the courtroom, my lawyer leaned in. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "they're going to realize what your father really did." I nodded, because tomorrow wasn't about the house anymore. It was about exposure. And once the truth comes out, there's no selling your way out of it. The second day of court felt heavier. Not louder, not dramatic. Heavier. Like everyone in the room understood that whatever was about to surface couldn't be folded back into polite denial. My brother looked exhausted, not tired, hollowed out. His confidence, the thing he'd always worn like armor, was gone. He kept rubbing his hands together, a nervous habit from childhood, back when Dad used to cover his mistakes before they ever reached daylight. My mother sat rigid, spine straight, lips pressed together. She still believed, I think, that motherhood was a kind of immunity. It wasn't. The judge called the session to order, and my lawyer stood. "Your Honor," he said, "today we will be addressing motive." That word landed hard, because motive changes everything. This wasn't about love. This wasn't about grief. This wasn't about what my father would have wanted. This was about who benefited and who always had. The forensic accountant returned to the stand. This time, he didn't talk about the trust. He talked about patterns. A timeline appeared on the screen, years stacked neatly on top of one another, each marked with transactions, transfers, and withdrawals. Small amounts at first, then larger, then reckless. Every spike in my brother's gambling activity was followed by a financial solution. A loan from Dad, a credit card paid off, a mysterious deposit into my brother's account. Then the source appeared, my mother's signature. The room shifted. My brother turned to her sharply, eyes wide. "What is this?" he hissed under his breath. She didn't answer. The accountant explained how my father had discovered the first unauthorized transfer nearly 12 years ago, how he confronted her privately, how she cried, promised, swore it would never happen again. It did. Again, and again, and again. That was when the judge asked the question that changed everything. Did the deceased ever authorize these transfers in writing? The accountant shook his head. No, Your Honor. In fact, the documentation indicates the opposite. He began limiting access and preparing legal safeguards shortly afterward. I felt my throat tighten. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was my father, realizing the people he loved most were quietly dismantling everything he'd built. The judge turned to my mother. Ma'am, he said evenly, did you redirect marital assets without your husband's consent? She opened her mouth, closed it. Then finally she nodded. I was trying to help my son, she said, voice trembling. What kind of mother wouldn't? The judge's reply was calm, devastating. One who understands that enabling is not help. My brother stood up. You told me Dad knew. You said he was fine with it. Her head snapped toward him. I was protecting you, she cried. You would have ruined yourself. The courtroom buzzed. The judge banged the gavel. Enough. That was the moment it all unraveled. My brother wasn't the golden child. He was the liability. And I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I was the contingency plan. My lawyer stood again. Your Honor, he said, we submit that the trust was not an act of favoritism, but of necessity. The deceased took deliberate steps to ensure that at least one child would not be financially destroyed by the actions of the others. Silence. The judge looked down at the papers in front of him, then up at my brother. You petitioned this court claiming undue influence, yet the evidence suggests you were the one exerting pressure, financial, emotional, and sustained. My brother's face went pale. This court does not reward manipulation, nor does it penalize foresight. He dismissed the challenge completely. The trust stood. The house was mine. But that wasn't the end. As people began to stand, the judge added one final statement. Based on what has been presented, this court is referring the financial findings to the appropriate authorities for further review. My mother gasped. My brother sat down hard like his legs had given out. I didn't move because I understood what that meant. The house was safe, but their consequences were just beginning. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Not many, but enough. My brother tried to speak, tried to spin, tried to cry. No one listened. My mother avoided every lens. She reached for my arm as we passed. Please, we're still family. I gently removed her hand. Family doesn't mean sacrifice without end. Dad knew that. Now I do too. As I walked away, I felt something unfamiliar. Not victory, relief, but also anticipation, because my father's last letter hadn't been about the court. It had been about what comes after, and I was about to find out exactly how far his protection went. The house felt different after the ruling. Not quieter, settled, like it had been holding its breath for years and finally exhaled. I stood alone in the living room that night, shoes still on, coat still buttoned, just staring at the walls. The same walls my brother had wanted to sell by the square foot. The same walls my mother had mentally emptied of furniture before the body was even cold. I pressed my palm flat against the paint. I'm still here, I whispered. The next morning, my lawyer called. There's one more item, he said. It wasn't relevant to the trust challenge, so it didn't come up in court. My stomach tightened. One more item? I repeated. Yes, he said, a letter, separate from the others. It wasn't stored in the safety deposit box. It was filed with my office. I closed my eyes. Of course it was. My father never put all his safeguards in one place. He thinks, the lawyer added carefully, you should read it in person. An hour later, I was sitting across from him in the same chair my father had occupied 15 years earlier. The office smelled faintly of old books and coffee, unchanged, preserved like the decisions made inside it. The lawyer slid a sealed envelope across the desk. My name was written on it. Below it, in smaller letters, "After the truth is known." I didn't open it right away. Part of me already understood what was coming. When I finally broke the seal, my hands were steady. That surprised me. The letter was longer than the others, more direct, less gentle. If you are reading this, then they did exactly what I expected. I swallowed. I want you to understand something very clearly. What happened in that courtroom was not punishment, it was exposure. He wrote about watching my brother spiral, about the first time he'd covered a debt and told himself it was love, about realizing too late that love without limits becomes permission. Then he wrote about my mother. She believes peace comes from keeping everyone quiet, but silence is not peace, it is surrender. The words hit harder than any testimony. Finally, he wrote about me. You survived by becoming invisible. You learned to carry weight without asking who put it on your shoulders. I should have stopped that sooner. Tears blurred the page. This letter is not an apology, it is a correction. I took a shaky breath. The final section was titled simply, "The Safeguard." My father had done more than protect the house. He had set conditions on my involvement. If my brother or mother attempted to coerce, threaten, or retaliate against me after the trust was upheld, a second legal mechanism would activate, one that removed me entirely from responsibility. No contact requirements, no financial obligations, no moral leverage. He had legally insulated my boundaries. And then came the line that broke me. I knew they would try to make you feel guilty. I wanted guilt to have nowhere to land. I sat there in silence long after I finished reading. My lawyer didn't rush me. When I finally looked up, he said something I'll never forget. Your father didn't just leave you assets, he left you permission. Permission to say no, to walk away, to stop explaining. I left the office feeling lighter, then my phone buzzed. A text from my brother. We need to talk privately. I stared at the screen. Then another message came in, from my mother. Please come home, we can fix this. I felt the old reflex rise, the urge to smooth, to mediate, to sacrifice myself for the illusion of harmony. Then I remembered the letter. I wanted guilt to have nowhere to land. I typed one response. There is nothing left to discuss. Please direct any communication through legal counsel. I blocked both numbers. That should have been the end. But the trail doesn't fade quietly. It escalates. And what my brother did next proved beyond any doubt that my father had been right to prepare for war. Because when control is gone, desperation takes its place. And desperation makes people dangerous. It happened 3 nights later, at 2:17 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked the clock the moment the sound dragged me out of sleep. A sharp, metallic crash that didn't belong to dreams. Not thunder, not the house settling. Glass. I sat up in bed, heart slamming so hard it felt like it might break my ribs. Then I heard his voice. My brother's. Slurred. Furious, loud in the way only desperation can be. Open the door, he shouted. I know you're in there. My body went cold. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I slid out of bed and crept to the hallway, every floorboard sounding like a confession. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw it. The back door. The small window beside it was shattered. Cold air poured in, carrying the smell of rain and something sharper, alcohol. My father's house, violated. "You think you won," my brother yelled, staggering into the kitchen. "You think paper makes you better than me." I ducked into the shadow of the hallway, phone already in my hand, thumb hovering over the screen. He was crying. Not the quiet kind, the ugly, unraveling kind. "You ruined my life," he shouted, sweeping his arm across the counter. A mug hit the floor and shattered. "They froze my accounts. They're asking questions. I can't even place a bet anymore." That was when I realized something chilling. He wasn't here for the house. He was here because everything else was gone. I backed up silently and locked myself in my bedroom, pressing my weight against the door as I dialed 911. My voice sounded strangely calm as I gave the address, whispered that someone had broken in, that I was afraid. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was. Downstairs, drawers slammed open, cabinets, the unmistakable sound of someone searching. "You don't even deserve this place," my brother screamed. "Dad chose wrong." His footsteps started toward the stairs. I held my breath. Then his phone rang. I heard him answer it, voice shifting mid-rage into something pleading. Yes, I have it. I can get the money. Just give me a little more time." I felt my stomach drop. Money. That was when the truth clicked into place. This wasn't about family. It wasn't about grief. It wasn't even about resentment. He owed someone dangerous, and he thought the house was still his last chip. I heard him climbing the stairs now, slower, more deliberate. "You know I'm hiding," he called. "You always hide." He stopped outside my door. I pressed my back against it, heart pounding so hard I thought he must hear it. "You think Dad saved you?" he said softly. "He didn't. He just delayed the inevitable." He tried the handle. It held. For a moment, everything went silent. Then he laughed, low, broken. "Open the door, or I'll swear to God I'll tear this place apart." That was when the blue lights flashed through my window. The sound of sirens cut through the night like a blade. My brother froze. "What?" he whispered. Footsteps thundered up the driveway, commands shouted, flashlights cutting through darkness. "Police, step away from the door." My brother backed up slowly, hands raised. Too slowly. They took him down on the staircase, face pressed to the floor, cuffs snapping shut. I slid down against the inside of my door, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. When they finally came for me, when an officer gently knocked and told me it was safe, I opened the door and saw him being hauled past. His eyes met mine. For the first time in my life, there was no accusation in them, only fear. Later, at the station, I learned everything. The debts weren't just gambling anymore. They were loans, private, off the books, the kind that come with deadlines and consequences. He'd been counting on selling the house fast, desperate enough to break in, to threaten, to gamble one last time. And my father had known. That was the part that hit me hardest. The officer handed me a copy of the report, and tucked inside it was something familiar. A document, filed years earlier, a formal request from my father for a restraining order, never served, never executed, but documented. A contingency he'd hoped would never be needed. The officer looked at me carefully. "Your dad was trying to keep you safe long before tonight." I went home just before dawn. The house was a mess. Broken glass, drawers pulled out, things scattered. But it was still standing. So was I. I sat on the floor of the living room as the sun rose, light spilling through the windows my brother wanted to sell, and I finally understood the full weight of what my father had done. He hadn't just protected me from being homeless, he'd protected me from being collateral damage, from inheriting chaos, from being crushed under someone else's addictions and excuses. My phone buzzed once, a single message from my mother. They took him away. I don't know what to do. I stared at it for a long time. Then I remembered the letter. I wanted guilt to have nowhere to land. I set the phone down. Outside, the day continued like nothing had happened. Inside, something fundamental had ended, and something else, quiet, steady, unshakable, had finally begun.
The house was quiet in the weeks that followed. Not the uneasy quiet of waiting for another explosion, but the honest kind. The kind that settles after a storm has burned itself out. I replaced the broken glass. I repaired the door frame. I cleaned every drawer my brother had torn open, touching each object as I put it back, reclaiming not just space, but meaning. I kept expecting guilt to show up. It didn't. What arrived instead was grief, cleaner, clearer, and finally allowed to be mine. I grieved my father properly for the first time, not the version of him filtered through disappointment and silence, but the man who had watched, learned, and acted when words failed him, the man who knew the cost of enabling and paid the price of planning instead. I sat at the kitchen table where he used to drink his coffee and read the paper. I imagined him there, patient as always, knowing I'd eventually understand. I did. The legal aftermath unfolded quietly. My brother entered a court-mandated program. His debts became official matters, not family secrets. My mother withdrew from everyone, including me. She never apologized. I stopped waiting for one. Some endings don't come with closure from the people who hurt you. They come with clarity. I learned that boundaries don't make noise when they work. They don't shout or threaten. They simply hold. Friends asked if I felt victorious. That wasn't the word. I felt released. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for the next emergency. I wasn't budgeting my emotional energy around someone else's crisis. I wasn't being measured against my willingness to give things up. I had space. And space changes people. I planted a small garden in the backyard that spring. Nothing dramatic. Herbs, tomatoes, things that required patience instead of urgency. I painted the spare room. I turned it into a study, a place for thinking, not hiding. One afternoon, I found the very first letter my father had ever written me tucked into a book I hadn't opened in years. I read it again slowly. I didn't protect you the way I should have when you were young, so I decided to protect your future instead. I used to read that line and eke for what I hadn't received. Now I read it and recognize what I did. I survived. I adapted. I learned strength without permission. And when protection finally arrived, I knew how to hold it without apology. People talk a lot about fairness in families, but fairness isn't about equal outcomes. It's about accountability. My brother was given everything, time, money, forgiveness, without limits, and it nearly destroyed him. I was given expectations, responsibility, silence, and eventually a foundation strong enough to stand on alone. That was the justice in it, not revenge, balance. I don't pretend this story ends with reconciliation. It doesn't. Some relationships can't be repaired without reopening wounds that were never allowed to heal. I chose not to reopen mine. That choice doesn't make me cold, it makes me careful. I think about the comments I read on my YouTube videos, the ones that say, "I'm the responsible one too," or "I'm always the backup plan," or "I feel invisible in my own family." If that's you, I want you to hear this clearly.
You are not weak because you endured quietly. You are not selfish for protecting yourself now, and you are not wrong for accepting the truth when it finally arrives. Sometimes love shows up late. Sometimes it comes in ink instead of words. Sometimes it looks like a locked door, a legal document, a plan no one else knows about. That doesn't make it any less real. My father never stood up in a room and declared his loyalty to me. He never corrected my brother publicly. He never fought loud battles. He fought smart ones. And when the time came, when the people who underestimated me tried to take what wasn't theirs, his actions spoke with a force words never could. I live in that house now without fear, not because nothing bad can happen, but because I know this truth. Protecting yourself is not betrayal. Love does not require your destruction, and boundaries are not walls. They are doors you choose when to open. My father never saved me at the funeral. He saved me 15 years earlier, and I finally understand why.